This is Artists at Work, and I'm your host, Andrew Pa. With me today is Marla Berg from Kent State University, where she directs the Kent State University Opera program and is also on the voice faculty. She has appeared as a performer and a director throughout Northeast Ohio with organizations such as Nightingale Opera. Welcome, Marla.
Thank you.
It's so great, so good to have you here. I'm really excited today to have you because we're going to be talking about one of the most personal instruments, the voice.
Right.
So I wanted to start with, how did you get your start in music? Was it from, parents? I think you said your mother.
Right.
So let us know a little bit about your start.
I am one of 5 children, and I do credit or blame, I'm not sure which, my mother, because we always sang together from the time we were partly because she loved music, but then she also went back to school after she had all of us and got her degree in music. And so we always had music around us, and we sang together, we learned harmony, and it never occurred to me that other families didn't do this so necessarily. So as I progressed through school, I found out from feedback from other people that maybe I could sing fairly well. And I also caught the theater bug because as in my sophomore year, I was in our town and fell in love, as I was Emily, and fell in love with the theater.
Yeah.
And so when I chose to go on to school, to college, St. Olaf, I understand that it's near where you went to school.
Yeah, I went to Luther College, so we have a very similar background, that Lutheran college choral tradition, music tradition, very strong at those schools.
Right.
I really credit that for keeping my passion alive for music, just because you're surrounded by it constantly. Just an incredible experience when you're there, because did you get to go on some international tours while you were there as well?
Not international, but I did sing with the St. Olaf Choir, and so I got to do some touring with them.
Yeah, it was great. With the orchestra, I got to go to Vienna.
Oh my.
We went there for 3 weeks, actually.
Wow.
And that's actually where I kind of started to fall in love with opera, because I saw my first opera at the State Opera there, the Staatsoper, and it was just beautiful. It was just beautiful, and I saw 3 operas while I was there: Carmen, Magic Flute, and Marriage of Figaro.
Wow.
And I think it was Figaro that I actually got to see at the State Opera.
Wow.
And that's what really when I was there, that's when I said, I'm so going in the right field, because I can't imagine being surrounded by anything but that. So when you had probably had very similar experiences throughout your time at St. Olaf, and even probably prior.
Yeah.
So do you have any great examples of maybe when you were like on a tour with the St. Olaf Choir, maybe a moment where you said, this is definitely in the right field?
I can tell you exactly the moment beyond my first experience in the theater in high school. My parents took me and my older sister to the Opera House in Chicago, where Beverly Sills was giving a recital.
Yes.
And I remember we were way up in the top, looking down and seeing this teeny tiny person on the stage, and she was just magnificent and filled the room not only with sound, but with her personality. And I just sat there thinking, golly, I want to do that. And I remember being so moved when I left the theater and coming down all those stairs and crying. And I thought, I can't believe this. I have just experienced something that I would love to do in my life. And I didn't know at that time that I would do it. Not to that degree, but I've been involved in theater, in music, singing opera, as well as a lot of other things for ever since.
Yeah, a lot of what you've done in Northeast Ohio was musical theater, correct?
Some. Can
you just list some of the performances you've done?
I sang with Cleveland Opera years ago, and David Bamberger cast me as Marie in West Side Story in an incredible production. So I did that. I've done Carousel. I've done with Calliope Stage when it was still existing in Cleveland Heights. I did several productions there. The one I remember the most is A Little Night Music.
Lovely show.
Yeah, I've done Oliver at Porthouse. What else did I do at Porthouse? Oh, and the Abbess in Sound of Music. And over the years, I've done more than that, but I love both of them. I love musical theater, I love opera, and I've done a lot of concert work as well.
Yeah. So after you went to St. Olaf, was your major then at St. Olaf Music?
Not at first.
Not at first.
Because I didn't really know that you could have a career as a singer.
Okay.
I didn't know that. So I knew I wanted to be in music. I declared my major as history and literature, and boy, oh boy, that was a mistake. And in my junior year, decided I was going to change to a Bachelor of Music degree. And then I went on from there and got my master's at Cleveland Institute of Music and my artist diploma from Cleveland Institute of Music, and then got the bug and launched myself into New York City.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I lived there for about 8 years.
Oh, wow. So what was, kind of back to your training at St. Olaf and CIM, two very different, at least from my perspective, very different training grounds, because one is, you know, a liberal arts degree, and one is that super concentrated musical study. How was the transition between going there and then going to CIM? Was it pretty smooth? Because St. Olaf does have a very strong, you know, music program, and it is very conservatory-like.
I didn't find that it was difficult.
Okay.
I really, when I got to CIM, I sort of thought, okay, this makes sense. You know, that that was what I was doing, and I could concentrate on that.
Yeah.
So it wasn't difficult, actually.
Yeah, I actually kind of found the same thing. I kind of went in the opposite direction. I was at Luther, and then I went to state schools when I was done. And that was an interesting experience because of the just even more variety of people that you're around, even of a bigger variety of ideas that you're around. But I also found that when I was at these schools, I was able to concentrate just as much because it was a master's degree.
Right.
You know, so it's when you're in your master's, I think at whatever level, it's very concentrated. So when you were in New York, which that's news to me, what did you do while you were there? Were you constantly working, or did you kind of have to go between?
It started to develop once I was in New York because I got to take a lot more auditions. You're there, and at that time, most opera companies, regional opera companies, would come to New York for auditions, and so I was there, and I could get to more of the auditions than if I were here and had to travel for every single one. So I was doing that and supporting myself by answering the phone or typing or whatever it was, but I did travel a lot. And it got to a point sometimes where my temp job, I was replaced by another temp, and was fortunate enough to come back to my temp job. So I did the thing. I did the New York thing, yeah.
Yeah, I watched a lot of our Kent State alumni go there because I worked with Courthouse Theater as well. I was an assistant company manager, and I made a lot of friends with them, and I see them go to New York. I probably know about 50 people there who had to go through a very similar process until the acting work becomes more consistent. And they're able to, sustain themselves more consistently on living in both of those worlds. And I very much do the same thing. I perform a lot at night and do administrative work during the day as a marketing person. So that's absolutely incredible. So what brought you back to Ohio then? Well,
that was a life story. I met my ex-husband in New York, and his work brought us back to Cleveland. So then, I traveled back and forth until I had my daughter. And then the travel became less, although she went with me on a lot of gigs. She's been to Alaska when she was yay big and all over the place. So,
wow.
Yeah.
And then when did you first start at Kent State?
I think it was 2010.
2010. So you've been there about 8 years.
Well, I was there first as an adjunct.
Adjunct, okay.
And now 6 years, yeah.
6 years, okay. And then, so you teach opera. Well, you're the director of the opera program, but you also do voice. So you're also one of the voice faculty members. How many students do you have currently?
Currently I have 11, but up until this semester, I've had over 20 voice students as well. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Well, we're actually about to watch a little bit of a performance of the Kent State Opera. We're going to watch the Harpies, which was the production that we did at Kent last spring. It was one of 3 one-act operas. So I hope that you enjoy this brief clip from the Harpies with Marla Berg directing with the Kent State Opera and the Kent State University Orchestra.
quelle odeur! Oh, we come, oh, we come, oh, hail, Father. I know ye. Don't tell me. I know everything. Ye are the Argonauts, bravest of Hellene. Which of ye is Jason, who seeks the golden fleece? I am he. Thou dost a great deal for one mind, O Father. Who might thou be? I am Phineas. What? Phineas, the oracle, greatest of Phineas. The same, I beseech you, help me, save an old man from misery, depart not uncaring, leaving me thus, as you see. How, Father, save me from what? The Harpies. Hello, occipite, Seleno. Sternus Zeus has sent them to plague my days. Unhappy me, a fury has set a foot on my eyes. I drag unto the end a weary old age, and woe bitterest of all, the Harpies. They snatch the food and the drink from my mouth. What would that I am Phineas? What would this gift of prophecy? The foul Harpies leave me not one crumb. Sometimes they leave a morsel of food, then it reeks of decay. It smells too high hell. It is loathsome. It is loathsome. I had noticed a peculiar odor. You too?
Unhappy one, none other of man, is more wretched than thou, methinks. We will aid thee.
We'll smite the Harpies.
But upon one condition.
I know it already. What? And
welcome back. We hope you enjoyed that clip from Kent State University Opera's Spring 2017 production of the Harpies. And, I wanted to talk about some of that clip because it had a very, interesting staging. It had the pillars in the center, a desk, and then kind of a more general area.
Right.
And when you stage one act like that, and it's a smaller stage like Ludwig, you kind of have to set up stations, right? So you kind of have, you kind of isolate certain sections that are meant to be
playable.
Yeah.
That's correct.
So how do you kind of go about staging, when you are looking at an opera and you are considering that space? Because you frequently go between Ludwig and then also the black box or other spaces at Kent.
Yes, Right Curtis.
Right Curtis,
Which
yes.
is proscenium, so that it's more in theater in the round. I actually think it's really wonderful to have two different kinds of stages for the students because that way they can experience both and understand what's required of them in two different spaces like that. So to answer your question about staging, my goal in staging, first of all, is to tell the story in the most interesting way for the audience. But there's also an underlying idea, which is that I want the students to be trained in what they might be expected to do somewhere down the line in theater.
Yeah.
My staging comes from the story, and I try to make it as realistic as I can. So in this case, the Harpies are kind of a wild group.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And in the real story, they were pretty mean. So I didn't quite go that far. But I did, as you saw, I did make them do the movement, and boy, did they cross their eyes at me when I suggested that in our first staging rehearsal. But then they kind of got into it, and really had fun with the whole idea of who they were and what they were.
Yeah.
So, and then they learn and I learn, because this is a learning process for me as well, that somehow you have to bring the focus to particular characters that are singing solo or a duet, and then you have to bring them into more prominence. So that sort of dictates what the staging will become.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, one of the pictures that will come up on screen is actually with the Harpies behind the one singer in white, and that bring her into prominence. That's something that's that gives you some opportunities, probably different from a proscenium when you're on that kind of stage.
Correct.
Because it's a little easier to show that depth to the whole audience. Correct.
Right. That's right. Proscenium is trickier because you don't want to cut off the audience.
Yeah.
If you've got somebody in the center and you've got audience on both sides, it's trickier.
Yeah, and Right Curtis is it's the center doesn't necessarily have a lot of audience at that one because it has that entrance, actually.
That's right.
So you are actually working with a lot more audience on the sides.
That's correct, yeah.
For that space.
Yeah.
And last semester you did the Wacky World of Opera.
The wonderful Wacky World of Opera.
Yes, the wonderful Wacky World of Opera
Right.
And that was a collection of opera scenes. How do you kind of stage opera scenes in a proscenium theater like that? Is it easier or harder than doing a full opera in that kind of space?
It doesn't really have to do with the space so much as it has to do with doing 10 different scenes. And what I like to do is to kind of make a continuum, even if they don't necessarily connect with the same story. So that's the tricky part. And the students have to do all the set changes because we don't have a crew backstage.
Yeah.
So that's a part of it as well. So it's taking each individual scene, trying to tell that story, and then switching into the new scene and telling a whole different story.
Yeah.
So it's challenging for me, but it's also incredibly educational for the singers.
Yeah, and I think it gives the audience a very different perspective too, because they get to see, they kind of get a snapshot of each show. And in general, when you pick the scenes, I find that it's kind of fun because you want to go, oh, I've never seen this one before. What happens? And a lot of times I go home and I read up on it because I want to know what else happens afterwards.
That's right. And I've had many people tell me that.
Yeah. That's something that I've really enjoyed about an opera scenes program, and it's kind of an opportunity to maybe highlight some shows that people might not know as well too. And
Well, what I like to do actually in the scenes program as much as possible, my first goal, of course, is to serve the students and look at the talent that I have and then choose scenes that they would shine in.
Yeah.
But also, I like to include all different eras. So there's usually a contemporary piece, there is usually a piece from classical era, from the Romantic era. I love to do a Gilbert and Sullivan scene, just because not only is it Gilbert and Sullivan, but there's dialogue, and that gives the students a chance to work at something they're very uncomfortable doing, most of them, because we sing, we don't talk, right?
Yeah. Well, and I feel like a lot of undergraduates don't necessarily know opera is the direction they're going to go.
True.
Or even musical theater. So I think that's a really healthy thing to do, is kind of, do enough out of their comfort zone that they can go, okay, I'm getting more comfortable with this. Oh, I need to work on this if I want to actually enter this field.
True, that's right.
Great. So you kind of came from a world where you did a lot more performing, and then you started getting into directing. So at this point, you've directed nearly 15 shows between Kent State University and then outside organizations like Nightingale. So what's kind of some of the differences that, I mean, there's a lot of differences.
Yeah.
But what was probably the, I don't know, hardest difference? How did you kind of get into directing?
I got into directing because it presented itself to me. And so I jumped in with both feet. And I'm kicking myself now because all the years that I was on the stage, I wish I had paid more attention to all the other pieces. But you're so engaged in what you're doing that you don't necessarily pay attention, unless of course a flat is going to hit you in the head, right? Then you pay attention. So it's been a really high learning curve for me, but really fun, because now so much of it makes sense. It sense to me in a way that it never did before. So first, necessity. Second, choosing repertoire was probably one of the most difficult things, because I thought, since we're in an educational institution, I want to serve the students, but I also want to bring the audience along with us. I would say probably the most difficult thing is keeping the big picture in mind, because there are so many elements. I'm working on Die Fledermaus right now, and I have to think about, okay, I'm in this scene and I have a character returning, but where was that character before? And where did they exit? And then I have to go back and figure that out so that I bring them back in from the same place. It's that, and it's also thinking about the production issues, like lighting. How is it going to be lit, and where is the singer going to be lit the best? And then planning for if there's a dance number coming up, and if there is a chorus. That's very interesting too, because they are not just a mob that you sort of bring on and park and then send off. At least not what I like to do. So it's the big picture, I think, has been the most challenging to grapple with.
I suppose you kind of get a vision of each individual scene and you're like, how do I piece this together?
Yes, that's right.
Because you know from your own experience and maybe performing that show before, you're like, this is how I want that scene to go. I want it similar to that. I didn't like what we did at this production. I'm not going to do that. So that's very interesting. So let's talk a little bit about the upcoming Kent State production of Die Fledermaus, which is in English, The Bat.
Correct.
Sometimes referred to also as The Revenge of the Bat. Could you just walk us a little bit through the plot very briefly, just so we get an idea of what it's about? It's complicated. It's complicated, but
but I will start with the fact that it is about revenge. Falke and his friend Eisenstein, 30 years ago, had a night out of partying, and apparently one of them was a butterfly and the other one was the bat. And on their way home, Eisenstein thought it would be funny to leave his best friend on a park bench and go home. And the best friend fell asleep, and the next morning was caught by people in that society going, what is that guy doing? So he was mortified, embarrassed. So the story of Die Fledermaus is about Falke getting revenge by setting up this very intricate plot to get back at Eisenstein.
Yeah.
That's the gist of it. But there are many characters, really interesting, fun characters that are
Yeah,
all involved in it.
Yeah, like Prince Orlovsky.
Prince Orlovsky.
He's the prince who's kind of aloof, and then, oh, this is hilarious at the end. One of the also key components is champagne, of course. It has the very famous tribute to champagne chorus.
Yes.
And a lot of it takes place on New Year's Eve too.
Well, in our case, we're not playing that part.
You're not
We're
playing
just
that
playing that it's a very big party, and it's
Okay.
cool because Prince Orlovsky's in town. Everybody's heard about his parties.
Oh, okay.
So everybody in town wants to come to his party because he has champagne baths and gambling and dancing, and it's the party to go to.
That sounds like an amazing production. And that's on, when is that?
March 16th, 17th, and 18th. There are 3 performances.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it's been so great to have you here.
Yes.
And those 2 performances on the 16th and 17th are at 7:30 p.m.
Friday and Saturday, 7:30. Sunday matinee at 3 o'clock.
At 3 p.m. Great. Well, I hope you join us, and I want to thank Marla for being here. It's been a terrific time, and I've enjoyed talking about opera and studying voice and production with you.
Thank you,
for being
Andrew.
here.
Thank you.